Well, it's really great to be here among dear old and older friends, and also new friends, and certainly colleagues in the culture of design and creativity. I want to just start off by saying, since you're going to get a little stirred up. It's kind of impossible not to be when you see what would be presented. And I just want to say that my friend Neil Kadaswan is also here. He's a core member of City Repair, and he's been part of the boot camp for the last several days. So you can also talk with Neil. He's actually part of our really incredibly healthy and dynamic core culture. And if there's anything we've achieved after these 22 years, I think, that we've been activated design activists, it's the health of our core culture and its strength. So there's a lot that can be said about that, but it's as important as anything, the internal culture, that you're not just thinking about things as external objects or external causes, but that you yourself are the cause. And I mean, if that's true, then you get to be growing stronger all the time. Like to seek to be within that kind of health of that core. You come to a place where you're like not so defensive or feedback. You invite it more. You're actually actively interested in being more accountable and to be a stronger, better, more facilitative presence in the culture. And there's a lot of indicators of this coming. I mean, people really enjoying their work together, being more facilitative of each other. You can see the culture getting stronger and stronger. And of course, the beautiful thing about that is struggle becomes more of a pleasure than it was before. You become more attractive. Funding flows more easily toward you. People tell better stories about you. So they say in permaculture, and I teach urban permaculture, along with placemaking and architecture, that really we are as much the process and the product, the object, as anything else that we're working on. And I guess the highest aspiration is that we build community through everything that we do. Even if a person is thinking that they're paying us to do a building, it's the interaction, it's the cultivation of relationships and relational networks that is really our true goal, and we're transparent about that. That's what we're after. In fact, you might say that unsustainable design culture has been focused on form, and to a great extent to the exclusion of culture, thinking that form represents culture. So that's a complex discussion, obviously, to get into. But before I go much further, I want to say I brought 4 of these in case anybody wants to take one of our kind of cookbooks for design troublemaking back with you. They're $20 each, I think. Okay, so I'm part of City Repair, and I'm one of the co-founders, and that's a design activist nonprofit. I'm the founder of Communitecture, which is an architecture and planning office that is really over the edge, off the leash, collar off, blasting forward. Everything's an experiment. We don't know what the hell we're doing kind of attitude, which just makes everything more fun. It's really hard to be self-conscious and uptight and sort of racked with anxiety when you sort of decide that everything is an experiment. Although we really know what we're doing at the same time, but it's our attitude that makes us have more fun and be humble. Also, I'm part of a group called the Planet Repair Institute, and that's where we teach urban permaculture, and we do projects like City Repair. City Repair has come out of Planet Repair. Intersection Repair is a project of Planet Repair, and that's where we've passed legal ordinances across the country that permit, will really facilitate the transformation of street intersections into public squares for free, city by city. And I should say more about that, because that sounds crazy. But before cars existed for thousands of years, frankly, the most important things that happened in the streets were birthday parties. Not so much transportation. We used to see the spaces between our homes as kind of a community room. This is something that we have to fly across the ocean more lately to go to places like Italy in order to see how this works. where a car might come into the space, but because the driver actually is part of the community, they don't run everybody over, unlike would tend to happen here. America's got in a special sort of condition. We actually made a case to our city council, and they were rocked back on their heels, and they unanimously legalized the transformation of intersections, because we had just said to them, look at the places of our ancestors and the density of gathering places, and how high their indicators are of community health, and how low, compared to us, their incidence of strife, of violence, and crime. Look at where we live, which characteristically has not even one single public square in any neighborhood across the entire country, because we live in developments, we don't live in villages. We're still villagers by God, but we live in developments, which are basically, to a great extent, reductionist landscapes, where you live within what the developer was willing to pay for, while they tried to get as much out of the project as they could. So, not a single place to gather, not a single place to meet other people. So he said, look at the United States of America. Look at the 95 neighborhoods of Portland, Oregon. Not a single socially focused gathering place at all. And look at how high our crime rates are. And look at how low our public health indicators are. And they were like, oh my God. And so he said, can we please legalize the transformation of at least one of the 22,000 street intersections in Portland, Oregon? Because after all, according to these books, and we showed them a pile, these architectural and planning histories, Urban Design 101 tells us that where our pathways converge, our lives come together, and that's where the village emerges all over the planet Earth. It's the most basic urban design pattern of all. And so they legalized it. And on that day they said, we call this the Intersection Repair Ordinance because we have realized that communities must be broken. If there is no field for creative participation, where the community has the power itself to design and implement and program and maintain and build upon over time, has to be such a place. So that's now possible in cities across the country. If it's not already adopted here, then you certainly can do it. And I think your ancestors are just like looking over your shoulder, hoping that you will, because it's spectacular. I'll show you more about it in a second, but it has a spectacular unifying effect on the political leadership and the bureaucracy and its connections to become more deeply rooted in communities. And it certainly cultivates leadership and participation when you do this retrofit approach. So we also have block repair, where we transform arbitrarily developed blocks into villages by and for the people who live there. So all of this is about place-based culture. And this is essentially what we're doing. We're looking at the fact that we've come into this place where America has the fewest number of outdoor community gathering places of all first world nations. I want you to just think about that. Because as a designer, I say to you, we have a national design challenge. And not only is it hopefully our destiny to meet it, but in meeting that challenge, you will be introduced to the networks that will sustain you as a design facilitator or as a professional. I can tell you that. And I don't mean to sound crass about it, but all I do is build community, and I don't do marketing. I build community constantly. I just support and facilitate people. Anybody who calls and asks for help at our office, if it's a homeless person and they're like, I'm cold and alone tonight, we're out there to help them. And so we just build friends, build friendship networks. And that brings us work. Just because we make friends, people talk about us. There's this old saying that it's who you know, but the ancient villager saying is that you're part of a greater whole. You just do that, and people are like, damn, those guys rock. Have you heard about those guys? And pretty soon people are calling. So I let go of needing to search for work, and work comes to us. It dumps on us, and we have more than we can do. So then we give it away to some of our friends who are also part of this activist design culture. So I offer that to you, because as I said earlier in the day, we are acculturated through design school usually to just go into a profession where we wait for someone else to bring us a job, and then our design superpowers are activated once we're given the program to work on. But I think, I'm finding, along with my friends, that if you don't wait around and you do the things that you hear, like the world is calling for to happen, that things become different for you. More opportunity comes your way. And you might even say it's a spiritual approach. I kind of think it's a bit of a spiritual approach, to just trust that, when you're putting it out there on behalf of whatever it is in the universe, especially the life force of humanity, to support it, somehow the universe supports you for doing that. So I think it's a spiritual principle, at least it's working out as we see it. Now, I need to tell you, the reason I can talk like this is because I've been indoctrinated since I was a little kid by two architect parents, both my mother and my father. And my mother is this, she's sort of a grandmother version of Indiana Jones, architect. And she goes around studying ancient villages. She's like, look at how people used to be before their cultures were disrupted and they were conquered and forced to live in societies of characterized by specialization, regimentation, isolation, certainly patriarchy and oligarchy, and these confounding challenges that bring us our present political crisis even now. So listening to my mom, this is why City Repair does this work, because in the ancient villages of all of our peoples, there were many, there was an entire fabric of place that brought us together, even if we didn't want to meet other people. Just by getting outside and moving around, we would interact. We have to organize on Facebook and put out flyers and have a phone tree or what the hell. Whereas there are human landscapes where community builds itself, because the organs of the body of community are composed in a way that facilitate constant interaction. So this is why we do this. So yeah, we're waking up in the colonial grid. The United States is characterized by the colonial grid, and I love smart growth, and I certainly think of myself as a new urbanist, but I hate the colonial grid because it's always imposed through force and violence upon people who are doing everything they can to stop it. And as one native architect, a Cheyenne architect in San Francisco, told me, this was done to your own villages so long ago you don't even know who you are. So learn the story of the Romans subjugating the Celts. That was my next assignment, trying to understand what he meant by that. But it turns out we live in a culture of paradox, I think, and this is part of our design context. As architects, we sort of idealize or fantasize about building big things. So it's a big object, and then maybe only a few people have really built an identity around it. I think in that case, and since we're turning out to be unsustainable for the last several centuries at least with this approach, I think that the building is small, and whatever's big has to do with building the identity and the message, the metaphor that is involved. And on the other hand, you can work with a group of people and build a small thing, and that becomes a huge thing because you've built the life force, you've built the culture and the relational network that identifies with what has been made. That's big. So I think it turns out that big is small and small is big kind of thing. So what we're interested in that context is building what will endure, which is the human identity, the human culture. So now we'll see a little bit of this.
What you searching for? Huh? Yeah. What you looking for? What you searching for? Huh? Sun goes down, I'm on the hunt for something real good. What do I want? I'm willing to take my time, I ain't in a rush. I color outside the lines, I paint with a brush. Hush, listen to the heart. Trust is intuition in the dark. Catch a vision of the stars, living in the moment, forever getting lost. Looking for love, looking for food, searching for sun, searching for truth. Looking for function, searching for youth. Searching for something, looking for roots, shoots. That made me North Shore bound. How board shorts and a surfboard sound. I tell the ocean, preach. I'm at peace like peace. I search all around the world trying to find my mind, but each and every time I say my, I don't know nothing, but there's nothing that I can't learn. I search all around the world trying to find my mind, but each and every time I say my, I don't know nothing, but there's nothing that I can't learn. No, there's nothing that I can't learn. No, there's nothing. Man, shit is so great, shit is so great. What's really up though? Who's ready to rage? Been ready for days, the world is but a stage. So turn up the PA, resonate in the bay, turn the beats up. Shit is so great, who really up though? Who ready for rage? Been ready for days, the world is but a stage. So turn up the PA, LTPA, feel the beat.
So the people that were dancing there were the people who live right there. The ordinance in Portland requires that a minimum of 80% of the people who live within a 2-block radius around the intersection you're focusing on have to agree to the design. And I'm proud to tell you, we've never had less than 96%. That's crazy. 96% of Americans in a place agreeing about something. You know, we're always talking about finding common ground, and we don't realize that it seems to be missing everywhere. And at the same time, we've forgotten that before 1920, the greatest thing that happened in the streets of our country literally was the combined birthday parties of dozens of children whose families would celebrate birthdays out on the streets together month by month. And of course there were market activities, of course there were cultural festivals, of course wagons and bicycles and people needed to get through. Projects would happen out there. There were so many different utilities that the street had, but we seem to have forgotten that. For one thing, in 1920, it was legislated at one moment that streets were now only for cars. So we should understand this. What happened was that Kansas City and Cincinnati both tried to pass ordinances that would mechanically restrict the speed of cars when they were within a city. You would have to pull a certain lever on your car, and you couldn't go faster than 25 miles an hour. And at that point, oil companies in the automobile industry, fledgling automobile industry at the time, appealed to the president, the federal government, to pass sweeping legislation that would enforce that streets were now only for cars, and that people would have to travel straight lines and only travel, cross at corners. Basically, we would live like a 90-degree reality forevermore because of that. And they invented the crime of jaywalking. If you walked like a jay, which is basically like saying pagan, a person from the country was a jay, and a jay would walk wherever they wanted. And so they invented the crime of jaywalking, so that if you didn't just keep to the sidewalks and you were caught on the street, then you were breaking the law. And I just think it's important that not a single mother of any child in this country got to weigh in on whether or not that was okay. Like, yeah, let's give up hundreds of thousands of miles. Maybe even there was more than 1 million miles at that point in the United States of cultural space. So when we walk around thinking that we're placeless, actually the story is a little bit more complicated than that. It didn't used to be that way. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through this. So I'm coming from Portland, and I'm a placemaker. I'm a design activist, but I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. People who have been working on this cause with so many different initiatives and efforts over time to build community, to stop freeways, to build our public square. And my own parents were deeply involved in the early placemaking revolution of Portland. In fact, my father was the founder of our division of urban design in the city of Portland. So I grew up I'm sort of like this Frankenstein child of these two placemaking architect parents. Sort of their little experiment. My bedtime stories were always about the battles that were being fought for the great public spaces that we enjoy now in our city, places like Waterfront Park and Pioneer Square and others. And so I'd hear about these political dynamics, but I was like 5, 6, 7 years old listening to this stuff. And it really turned me on. I didn't always understand what was going on. And that was my dad's story. My mom really is still a cultural investigator out kind of making the connections to try to understand what were people like before their voice and their choice was taken away. What were we like back when within listening distance there was always animated public space where you could hear market activities outside in the morning. When I was in Italy for several different immersions, I was told about songs that they have in some villages to remind them of what it was like back during the Nazi occupation, World War II, when you wouldn't hear people outside anymore because they couldn't gather. Songs to remind them, like, if you don't hear people out on the piazza, something's gone wrong again. And another song that a man told me about in Siena that goes something like, if there isn't at least 3 places for a grandmother to sit between where she lives and where she goes to get her bread, if she is not there in public space to be a witness and a continuity and a storyteller, we will all lose our minds. I think that's a building code for us right there. We need something like that right now. So here's a picture that we drew a few years ago for a poster for this great barn raising event that happens all over the city of Portland. This year there's going to be 48 community projects happening simultaneously from June 1st to June 10th. They're all totally invited to come and see how this works, where everyone's lighting up all over the city about the power of design to transform their environments. And this is just a drawing, but everything about this drawing is how we live in Portland, retrofitting old places to make them vital and new and highly ecological, reoccupying public space in revolutionary ways, growing freaking food and trees everywhere on every available surface, whether it's vertical or horizontal, and occupying the streets not just because it's a festival, but it's how we live. In fact, most of the people in this picture would be naked anyway, as you'll see. So this story, though, starts off with small, simple gestures. In fact, for those of you who have studied permaculture basically says, don't worry so much. Just start where you can. You have enough knowledge right now to just get started. As Shakespeare said, just freaking get started. Permaculture's like, whatever you do, just guarantee that you have a little bit of success and learn as you go, and then you'll be ready for the next round. So I'm showing you this story because our story starts with creating the first Little Free Library in the world. According to littlefreelibrary.org, who has really taken on this project of spreading these around the world, they used to credit us for having started this in 1996. We built several of these in Portland, knowing that they would simply be replicated because, my God, what a good idea, what a great service learning project. So we started off on a modest scale, but we were doing a lot around participation, obviously youth engagement, revolutionizing public space, making important symbolic statements about the power of and the value of learning. So we got started in a small way, leading to redesigning entire gigantic landscapes in the Bay Area. This is a vision of Mare Island, which is a former naval base, millions of square feet of land and architecture, remnant naval architecture. And this is a lot about community design because we've mined the goals and objectives and the vision documents of adjacent Vallejo for what would happen on this island, including arts and ecology centers, outdoor education, live, work environments where people would create the new technologies that have to be developed in order to meet the challenges that climate change is bringing us, especially including sea level rise, combining with things like king tides, combining with things like giant storms, combining with things like driving wind that sort of gathers the water and throws it at you at unprecedented heights. So we've been working on the redesign not only of Mare Island, but of the majority of San Francisco to help San Francisco to be able to transition itself and deal with inundation and sea level rise at scales that are doable, even at a scale where a family can engage its own solutions, like to keep water out of the system by legalizing humanure and gray water systems and water catchment systems, which we've already presented to the city of San Francisco. There's a lot to say about this. There's a lot of grieving going on in isolation in the United States right now. So this proposes, in response to Vallejo's documents, a regional grieving center that actually is an extension of an existing, the oldest naval cemetery actually in the Pacific. So the entire landscape of the naval facility being reinvented to meet the needs of the region. And all of this guided by basically a community-built approach, because we're not just drawing stuff, we're anticipating that this stuff matches what the community has said that it needs, and then in every way the community itself is housed here and gets to work here and even gets to build these environments as the basis of its rejuvenated economy. One of the most special parts of this is to create an intentional village for refugees and immigrants coming into the country who need economic opportunity. So this is a place where basically small-scale technologies are developed by people who live in this regenerative landscape, including an agricultural landscape as well. Now I'm going to get into some of the work that we've been doing in Portland that we've really been developing models for the rest of the country. This is the rebuilding center of our United Villages before it was built. This is what it looks like now. The thing is made entirely out of recycled and natural materials. It's about 120 square feet. It basically takes stuff out of the waste stream, reconditions it, and makes it available for pennies on the dollar. And vast pieces of it were actually built by the families who live within a couple of blocks, especially this earthen masonry. It's actually a cob gathering place that is the main pedestrian entry to the building. This is what it looks like inside. Really a kind of a fabulous, gigantic, kind of sculptural, architectural shed, but filled with this incredible richness of stuff that would have otherwise gone to the waste, into the dump. This place, the Capaces Institute in honor of Cesar Chavez. This is a training facility that's being replicated across the country. It's been built mostly by mentoring and directly teaching youth about design and building, so that the building cost very little to construct, because they started the mentorship program that the building is supposed to support with the very first shovel that was dug into the ground and every wall that was raised. So it is the most energy efficient office building in the country, using passive house design strategies, but applied to a commercial office building. It essentially takes about 3 people and a coffee maker to heat this building. And obviously it's embellished with stories of the community. We're doing a lot of infill co-housing, so these buildings are rather vernacular looking as they fit very gracefully into the context where they're built. But what's radical is that everybody might own their buildings separately, but they collectively own the land that they're all sitting on. And some of these are even radical socially. This is actually owned and managed by autistic people for themselves. And that's a bit of a design challenge right there. This is a regenerative farm guided by permaculture and biodynamic principles. This is a cooperatively owned and managed farm in Southwest Portland that only grows food for the most adjacent communities. Its primary mission is to build soil fertility and sequester carbon while it pumps out outrageously healthy and luscious food. And we've designed the architectural landscape, including these multi-family passive solar straw bale homes. So we do a lot of designing, we do a lot of building, but we also have to improvise. Now, a lot of what we've seen today is all about engaging people, and building community in the process. Sometimes you just need to go in without a plan. So out at the Pickathon Festival, what we do in big teams is we go through the forest, we collect thousands and thousands of branches, and we build environments spontaneously, improvisationally, using branches. So you can imagine you find this really beautiful, long, arcing branch that's just got to become part of this, of what's called the woods stage. And it's made entirely out of branches. And when you ask the musicians, like, what is it that makes you want to come here? Because it's legendary. Everybody wants to be on the stage. I mean, one guy answered kind of like this. He's like, God, it just makes me feel crazy. It just brings stuff out of me. And that's because the stage is built by people who are having fun and singing songs and telling stories as they're creating together. So sometimes they'll have branches that are sort of bursting out of the stage that look like DNA spirals coming out over the crowd, and nobody planned that. And to have that kind of improvisational energy is truly rewarding. And I just want to point out, we don't do that in design school. We think, we rationalize, we plan out, we design down to the last nail, and then we don't get to have this kind of fun. But I hope for you for yourselves, you plan in your career to have as much freaking fun as you can. Let go of the baggage of self-seriousness that is too often acculturated in us. Decide to make friends with the projects that you do, and certainly decide to become an increasingly healthy and strong person and have as much fun as you can. So we have taken over our town. There are hundreds and hundreds of projects, and just talking about what City Repair and Communitech has done, more than 850 at this point, and I'm not even going to count anymore. But we have the most nonprofits that are focused on building community too, and so it's beyond knowing all that is happening at any given moment in the city of Portland. But how do you get there? Stuff like that little library is how you get there. Be strategic. Don't just build something in a backyard, although I think that's really fun. You can build bat houses and put them up in trees or underneath eaves and stuff. But when you locate something in public space, it might have just been you and a couple of foster kids that built it. But now thousands of people will see it and be affected by the power of the metaphor that you embed in that artifact, for instance. So it can spread inspiration, it can inspire more things to happen. But I just want to sort of relax for a second, because in architecture school, so much of the time we're thinking. I feel like we have to create a rationale, and I think that it's important to have a grounded sort of point from which you are coming in your modus, in your goals. At the same time, I need it to be simple too, like on an emotional level. For me, this is what it's all about. If we're going to live in a better world, this is my most basic organizing principle. I want to live in a world where anyone can love anyone else that they choose with safety and freedom in public space. And I pretty much figure if that's my primary concern, we'll get the bioswales and the green roofs and the R values that we want. We'll work out the other details as long as this highest goal is taken care of. So this is a simple organizing strategy that I'm always keeping in mind. And also this, I want to reintegrate nature and humanity. I once read Louis Kahn say that nature and humanity are separate, and I think Mies said it as well, in their own way. And maybe they didn't mean like to make us into this industrial, dehumanizing urban landscape, but I think that's what's happened. So seeking ways for us to reintegrate not just our relationship, but our understanding of ourselves. We are of nature. We are nature in some amazing way, and certainly in many places for pollinator habitat. Our work confronts gentrification. We figure, we're banking on this, that by building local community to become stronger and stronger and stronger, to take over basically its own realm and have power of place, that we'll be able to avert the destruction of the fabric of our reality, and not just physical stuff. To recognize that a building as old as this was built by people who lived within walking distance. They were driving handmade nails that were driven forever, as they were probably teaching their child how to use a hammer. So many stories embedded in this. And if you just look at the nails that we're driving now, ka-chung, 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 where people are just wanting to go home at 5 o'clock, it's not as intimate, it's not as personal. And if we're going to let that happen to what our ancestors made for us, then what will happen to everything that we ever create? So it's time to take it personal. So we figure our work is confronting this. We're confronting this guy too. Mr. NIMBY, Mr. Patriarch. I don't even know this guy's name, but he seems to be everywhere. Like, somebody looking like this decided in 1785 to configure the National Land Ordinance of the United States that mandated the Roman grid over everything to the Pacific Ocean all at once. Indigenous societies, dreams and stories notwithstanding the attack, literally. And it's characterized by a square. It's characterized by a grid in which the landscapes that we inhabit are seen foremost as parcels and not as villages, as lots to be turned over and turned over, first perhaps as orchards, mowed down to become suburbs, mowed down to become more dense, mowed down to become, mid-rise mixed use, and eventually to become something denser, just seen as a market commodity the whole damn time, and never necessarily to be a cultural thing that lasts. Tired of it. And look at this game Monopoly, invented by Lizzie Magie at the beginning of the last century. She was a young American woman, and she's like, oh my God, I see what's happening. We're living in Roman colonialism. Americans, we must understand what's happening. So she invented this game. When you play this game, you can see what's happening to us. You go around the board, you collect a little money in order to keep going. The only form of commons is a jail and a parking lot. And you're tearing down housing and putting in more dense buildings as if that's fun. But when you look a little closer at the houses you're tearing out, there's all these families being displaced. Oh no, what about our kids and our relationships with our neighbors? Oh no, and just swept away as if you don't matter. Okay, what's going on? Because I don't think anyone ever chose this. Nobody ever said, hey, what fun, let's live in a bunch of squares. Let's live in a placeless landscape where we don't even talk to each other anymore. Let's just work all the time. So this is the truth. Villages look like this. And places like this are never made by the people who live there unless it's your job to build it. Nobody ever wants to live in a square. Look at the difference. Over here is the block prototype, which tends to be a circle with an open space in the middle that brings everyone together. Over here, from the East Coast to the West, all the same. Whoops, sorry, even though for thousands upon thousands of freaking thousands of years we used to have this open space that brought us together, we just forgot to put it in from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And then here, where in an Italian village you would find the plaza, or in Greece you would find the platea, or in France you would find the place, or in Spain you would find the plaza, over here in the American context, it just doesn't get to happen. Where pathways converge does not get to, become a place of convergence of our lives. Breaks the first rule of urban design. Ensures our isolation from each other, and then when you lay zoning on top of that, that forces you to leave the home zone at the start of the day to go to the work zone in order to get the money to pay for the place where you barely get to be. We never chose this, and certainly the people who live here would never have chosen it. This is incidentally is an aerial view of a Dogon village, which you should look up. One of the most amazing, expressive landscapes in all the world, the lowest incidence of crime, the highest expressions of quality of life, and directly compare it to this. And identify with this, please, because your own ancestors would have come from some kind of landscape much more like this. But let's just face it, the empire that's characterized by the grid always has a problem with the geomorphic, utterly sustainable village. They always have had an issue with the places of our ancestors. And I think it's time to just look in the mirror, like, why in the world are we putting up with this? Because foxes wouldn't. Like, if a developer fox came along and said, hey, I've got a great idea. How about if we just liquidate your den and I can sell it for a profit and you can move to a trailer in the middle of the desert of Arizona for $5 a night? Like, foxes would not put up with this, and neither would cliff swallows. Cliff swallows have to put mud in their mouth and daub together their homes with little entrances from underneath in order to just be a cliff swallow. It's how their physiology works, and if they don't, they'll become obese and they won't be able to fly. And let's not even get started on termite mounds, because nobody can make a termite mound like termites do with all of the different molds and spores that they modulate the flow of moisture and temperature through us by taking the temperature and licking the sides of the multiple cooling towers that are part of this. They have to do this in order to just qualify as a termite society. Okay, the truth is that even in the USA before the car existed, people would be out on the streets with a multiplicity of different kinds of activities. Look at these people taking their little sort of big community selfie here, not getting mowed down in the streets. This is how it used to be. Look at all the things that are happening there. Nobody's apparently getting killed. About 50 people a year would die in the USA before 1905. By 1920, it was 30,000 a year because of the advent of the car, which is why Cincinnati and Kansas City called the question. And now, as we know, it's just become more intense since then. I think we should resent the fact that we have to pay a ticket and fly across the ocean to visit a decent village. Where you see Little girls sitting on the laps of their grandmothers, practicing the songs and stories of the people. And then the grandmother, who is part of that regenerative cycle, looks into her eyes and knows that we will continue into the future. We have broken that ancestral relationship, and I think we have no chance to be sustainable if the very social, familial, multi-generational basis of our being has been broken. We must rejoin that connection. Certainly, the fact that our young boys don't get to grow up to be young men and then older men in the presence of the continuity of having a place and a belonging in their community is hurting us. Men are hurting their own families and lashing out across the society in aberrant ways because of this lack of rootedness and this lack of mentorship, which is automatically happening in our context of isolation. This is a cruel joke. The only place you can find a village is on a sign. You know, you might pull in here thinking, okay, there's going to be a lunch special. A grandmother will have made it for me. You know, ain't no stinking village. Where's the village? You know, condo developments are calling themselves a village, but there's no local place-based economy, no joyous cultural celebration, there's no artifacts that exhibit their common sense with each other. What's missing in the context of colonialism, to take it most personally, is our capacity to take what we know is possible in the world and then inhabit it in our lives. The empire has a big problem with that, because that means that you have indomitable people who are uncontrollable. So the empire invents all manner of fake things, fake news, fake religious mythological constructs, certainly, that disempower us and make us guilty for things we never chose. The geomorphic village actually lives inside of us, and this is the thing we see as we work with a lot of homeless people, generating villages. Every single combination of homeless people regenerates the same complete program of the essential human village. Even when they're just putting tarps over themselves, they immediately start to do this. We're hardwired, each and every one of us, to regenerate human habitat if we just have enough stability and continuity and safety to do it. Okay, so this is one of my mom's photos, and she's down deep inside of the earth, and she brought me to this place in Umbria in northern Italy, and she's like, son, look at this. This is who people are. Like, there was an extended drought, they needed to get down to water, they started to hack through the rock, and people were dying to get down to the water just to ensure that there would always be access to the water for generations that hadn't even been born yet. That's who we are, this larger sense of self that we serve, our people. So this is a glorious one. 2 double helix rampways that bring you down to get the water and let you go back up the other way. Usually donkeys carrying a whole lot of water back up to the surface. This is an expression of public space, certainly, and of a common dream that we cannot lose, because it's in our fiber. Millions of people live inside of us, coming out through our actions and choices every day. In this case, the president had just told these Czechoslovakians that they can no longer gather in public space, their own public space, because it's become too dangerous to him. So they go onto a rooftop to dance. You know, and as soon as people hold hands and start to look each other in the eye, what they remember is that they are the village. It isn't even the architecture. The architecture is like a shell to support the snail. It's the life force of the snail that is what it's all about. Okay, so that brings us to my favorite metaphor, the revolt of the pawns. So you know old-fashioned chess, you line up these people on the different sides of the boards according to their superficial differences. You've got lighter ones over here, you've got darker ones over here. But this is the 60s. So you're going to have people trading sides, you've got community organizers, you've got design activists in there. So these 2 pawns decide to come out and meet in the middle. They start off by saying, I'm so sorry for what happened in that last game. We came out and attacked you, and you attacked us, and then we killed you, and you killed us. This whole game is unsustainable. It's designed to end. So they they trade sides, and they're talking to the other pawns. You guys are always talking about getting out of the box and thinking outside the box. You fools, don't you realize we're in boxes? And the other pawns are like, yeah, but this is what we have to do. We can't question this. These are our jobs. We have to do what we're told. Fortunately, they get into small groups with facilitators. And they're sitting there hugging each other and crying and talking about their isolation. And their oppressive childhoods, and they're like, oh my God, you were going through this too, I thought it was just me. So they're realizing that everyone's going through this together. They go to the back row to confront their oppressors. They're like, you guys are always taking our stuff, telling us what to do. And these guys are like, what are you talking about? We never took more than our share. The pawns get pissed, kick them off the board. So this is every revolution, right? Every revolution, people finally go like, enough, and kick the other guys off the board. But not this time. Since the 60s and 70s, people have been saying, wait a second. Let's see if we can get out of our boxes. Let's see if we can just see each other's face, how interesting it starts to look like a circle. And the community organizers start saying, like, stop hitting over there, come on, this game does not have to end. So, that's cool. Meanwhile, on all these other chessboards, they start to hear what's going on. Which is making the kings and queens really nervous. They're like, oh my God, the pawns are figuring out the game, oh no, oh no. Meanwhile, the pawns just want to have a picnic, they don't want to kill anyone. But, so stuff starts to happen, and that's the cool thing about design activism. You engender change, especially in a strategic location. Everyone's going to notice. They're all trying to figure out their paradigm just like you. They'll be inspired by what you'll do, and they'll take your stories elsewhere. Meanwhile, the pawns have realized that the time has come. Meanwhile, back on the first board, they are rocking out the place. Finally got some freaking furniture. They got a dining room table. They bought a rocket stove. They've got a little harvest. I guess that's a little video player there. They've also got a couple of hot tubs down here at this corner. They grew 3 Asian pears and a squash. They're having a little harvest festival. They put in some perennial gardens, and they're obviously maturing here. It's a permacultural landscape. What I'm saying here, though, with this goofiness, is that what we're going to do, and I'm just saying it, is we're going to redefine the impossible in this generation, because we can't wait around anymore, can we? We're going to redefine the impossible, and the mundane is going to become the miraculous. That's our design challenge right now. Like this, it's already real in some places. Like here's John and Lynn, who are getting married. They met here at the 24-hour solar-powered self-service tea station, Southeast 9th and Sheridan, Selwood. Okay, so they met here, it's a solar-powered system. Now they're getting married by their friends. They're surrounded by their friends from blocks around, as well as their families and friends. They're obviously doing a lot of traffic calming right now, building a lot of community. In fact, the American Journal of Public Health has published studies that establish that by doing this to street intersections, everyone gets mentally and physically healthier. They interact more, they are not racked with anxiety because they know that they're surrounded by friends. So the first effect is the psychological landscape, which brings us to Jane. Jane grew up around one of these retrofit piazzas. We called it an emergency piazza. Oh my God, we've got a cultural emergency. So she grows up on the edge of this. And Jane, she's offered a full ride to go to William and Mary College, but she's like, I can learn more just by staying in my neighborhood. This is what she does. She walks around the neighborhood knocking on doors and just saying hello to the other villagers. She knows she lives in a compartmentalized landscape of isolation. And she has interests. She's like, I want to learn about putting in a rain barrel tower. Knock, knock, knock. Do you know anything about water systems? Well, actually, yes. I'm a civil engineer. She wants to learn about gardening. So she goes and knocks on a few more doors. She's opening up the library of humanity that is, check it out. There are, as we speak, within 2 blocks, there's grandmothers sitting there just wishing that they could impart their knowledge to some younger person. So one of the greatest crises in our culture is the breaking of mentorship. Jane, you might say, wait a second, Community Build Association, isn't this about art? Hell yes, it's about art. The culinary arts, for one thing. The art and the mystery, the magic of finding mushrooms out in the forest. Like she's going around to neighbors and finding out that they know these things. The art of actually canning and processing and preparing food and taking care of her family in this way. I think it's alchemy to collect leaves off of the streets and off of yards and put it where it belongs, which is soil building in the landscape, and not just put it in some green bin and have it hauled away. Like soil stewardship is a basic human responsibility, I think. And I think that's a form of living art. Bookmaking, shoemaking, this is just coming from unlocking her neighbors. Taking care of children, she sees it as an inherent responsibility as a community leader and as a young person to do this. And a badass builder who can do anything, literally freaking anything. You want something You want her to paint a portrait, you want her to create a sculpture, you want her to build your house. She's full spectrum, off the leash, creative human, villager, placemaker. And this is what we're doing on the community level. This is what the community built association stuff is all about. We want to cultivate this empowerment to take the artistic processes that we're seeding this awareness and then release people into the world to recreate their life in new terms. So to do it as a whole community, in which now it's the barn raising, where we do things that are tremendous together. We started off our project 22 years ago looking at this drawing and just being like, look at the typical American having to traverse the landscape in order to do their work and then come home at the end of the day to then go get food over here and then meet some friends down here and go to the doctor, pick up their child over here, needing money just to move around. Like they have to work in order to get the money just to serve the fact that they don't live in their own community. Everyone, all across the grid, basically living a perfunctory life where we need money for almost every interaction, not necessarily making a new friend at the end of the day, even though we might traverse miles of the gridscape. So we're like, that's unsustainable. That's a massive impact on the world, huge carbon release. So this is what we've been working on the whole time, to freaking save the world, frankly. And not us saving the world, but everyone, everywhere, being able to localize their lives, connect with the people around them, minimize the amount of distance that they have to travel, and meet their needs as locally as possible. Like, yeah, all around this woman who actually happens to be a roofer are people who need their roof fixed sometimes. There are doctors, there are people who grow food and take care of children. In fact, the entire spectrum, that powers our society is resident in every single neighborhood, and yet we all leave each other at the start of the day to go work elsewhere, while we're told that in the home zone we can't really create livelihood by law. Who decided that? No mother. So this is what we've been working on the whole time. Retrofit the colonial grid with the patterns and systems that have been disrupted and obscured, that are actually ancestral, and we think biologically hardwired in us to create and then joyously inhabit. Commercial break. Okay. In order to get there, I'm going to show you a little thing that we did. So I was working in a huge architecture and planning firm in 1988. There was this giant toxic waste cover-up. It's it's the biggest firm in Oregon. Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects, actually. It was a huge toxic waste cover-up. People were joking about how we had paid off government inspectors to look the other way while we built the Bank of America on the edge of the Willamette River on top of a huge unremediated waste dump. So I was so upset by this. I wasn't even an environmentalist back then, but the deceit and the flippancy was so appalling to me that I couldn't stand it, so I quit that day. And it was quite a beautiful job I did of quitting, because I told them exactly why I was leaving. I reaffirmed in them. I brought all 6 of my bosses into the conference room, and I said to them, "Can I see you in the conference room right now?" And you only get to talk to your boss like that once. So they come into the conference room and they're like, what? And I'm like, just going on about how we had given up our dreams, like why we went to design school, to make the world a better place. And here we find ourselves compromising all the time and not even advocate for easy things that we could get done. And just giving up constantly. And when I quit, I was like, I know you still have it in you, but I'm leaving. And I traveled for like 7 years. And I went around from one indigenous culture to the next, just asking, like, do you have any idea what was wrong with me? What was wrong with my people? And it took a while, but any community of color where I was would just be like, damn, really? Wow, a white man is asking what we think? Let's clear the table and get some drinks and some food. This is going to be great. But what everyone wanted to talk about was colonialism and cultural disruption and subjugation and same story over and over again. So I also came back armed with a strategy, which was to elicit the program of the village back within the landscape of isolation, and just see, on a hunch, whether or not humanity would respond. This was the first project, even before the little library, this tea house. And you can see that it's a womb space. It's made out of 10 rooms that are all programmed. They're archetypal spaces. The Room of Love was filled with poems by E.E. Cummings and others, filled with pillows. It was an incredibly intimate atmosphere, and people would just scooch together in there and have the most wonderful conversations. There was the best friend stage, the shed, also the room of humility, the grandmother's porch, a place of continuity and comfort, the improvisational room, the freedom, basically a freedom of expression, all these different rooms that would be a different aspect of the archetypal self. And then it was built for about $65 actually, because back then you could actually just plunder dumpsters for all kinds of building materials, because there was no consciousness back then that stuff had value. So we built this entirely out of doors and windows, knowing that at some point there would be too many people and people couldn't get in, so then all of the doors and windows on the perimeter were all opened. So imagine, and we were being metaphorical and literal about it. We were saying that the walls that stop you can be opened. They can be thought of as doorways or as windows that you can pass through. And so the inside became the outside in this living garden. So it was a remarkable space, had a transformative effect, primarily because, frankly, American communities are missing meeting houses of free association that are non-dogmatic and don't require you to pay something in order to be there. It was entirely humble. As you can see, the floors were kind of undulating, made out of pallets. So the walls were held up by branches from trees that had fallen down in the storm of '96. The walls were made, the floors were made out of these undulating pallets, and then it was surrounded by this curtain of doors and windows with trees coming up through the floor and out the roof, and then branches coming down through sleeves in the roof back into the space. So you almost couldn't see where the architecture and nature began and ended, and this was part of the point. For me, as a person educated in architecture and planning, I was intentionally refuting this idea that nature and humanity were separate, and it was this bet, like, will people respond powerfully in a space that says, no, humanity and nature are one? And indeed, the effect was unbelievably rewarding. This is what it looked like, glowing with the light of 88 candles on the last night. But this is what it affected, this awareness in the community. A couple of little girls who always came to the tea house had been unfortunately run over by a car to go to the closest park 4 blocks to the north. We were in a very low-income neighborhood here, and there were no places for children to play anywhere in the community except this little tea house. So all these adults got together in a local restaurant. They were upset, like, why did the girls get run over? Why was there no place to play? So we started to talk about westward expansion and manifest destiny in a whole new light, in which placelessness was now personal. Fortunately, this 13-year-old young woman named Natasha had brought this chart of what the primary breadwinners in each house did for a living. This is where our tea house was. She handed it to the adults and she said, if you're wondering why things are the way they are, why don't we just wonder how we could actually be connected if we actually knew each other and worked together? 5 minutes later, it looked like this. People were saying, oh my God, there's a chef, we all like to eat food. There's a doctor, we all get sick. There's a roofer, we all have roofs. There's a social worker, we all have social problems. An architect could work with an ironsmith, could work with an electrician, could work with a plumber, could work with a designer, could work with a landscaper. So the implications were thrilling, but also startling, like, oh my God, we could have known each other and worked together the whole time, but we didn't have a single gathering place. So we decided to create one. We looked at the website of the county and the state, of the city, and of our own neighborhood association, all of them saying, engage youth to create gathering places, slow traffic, address livability and sustainability indicators. So we called the Department of Transportation and said, hey, we've just come upon this idea. We've noticed that we don't have any gathering places at all in our community, but the places that our ancestors came from had them all over the place. Perhaps we could put in one in this street intersection. And they said, well, we're just engineers, so we don't know anything about history. I said, yeah, but you're in charge of thousands of miles of street right-of-way. Shouldn't you know something about it? Besides, that's public space, so nobody can use it. And we said, God, did you just hear what you said? That's like watching the movie Brazil. This is a dystopia or something. And they're like, oh, you're so frustrating. Why don't you go home? And we said, well, we are home. There's nowhere to go. So we went down there and we went down to their office. We're like, we'll meet you in your conference room in 20 minutes. We're going to be there. I just have one question for you, and this was the question. Do you mean to tell us that after 30 years of working to buy this little hovel on the corner here, that we have no power where we live, and you who have never even stood here in your life have the power over what happens here? And he's like, duh, that's how the grid works. We said, duh, not anymore. We were charged up. We'd had our tea house, we were ready to go, we learned all these historically based issues. So we just did it anyway. Like, we painted the street, we installed this 24-hour solar-powered self-service tea station. Here's our first little free library. This was the first intersection, the first solar-powered tea station, the first library, all going in at once. All these little features on all the corners. Immediately, yards starting to become gardens, that effect, expanding outward. But building all these things without permission. Transportation got mad at us and they said, we told you don't have the power to do that. And we said, well, apparently we do, because here it is. Like, oh, you're so frustrating. And about that time, we're sitting there in a meeting with them. Ed, this 7-foot-tall policeman, walks in and he's like, looks at the Department of Transportation folks and says, why don't you back the freak off? Haven't you looked at your own website, at your own goals and objectives that these guys have already met without even asking for any tax base? Like, maybe things can go right for once. Maybe the community can have a voice where the police loved this. In fact, they showed up. They showed up here and they said, when transportation gives you a problem, call the police, because this is the best thing we've ever seen. Okay, so that was quickly legalized for everyone in the city of Portland to do, unanimously by the city council and the mayor, for every neighborhood to do to as many street intersections as people wanted for free, with a process as quick as 2 weeks. Because it's worse to not do it. The things that are happening in our communities, the ways that we are beset, not just by isolation, but actively by violence, can be abated by things like this, as we know now, through surveys. So, of course, you start to see the restoration of birthday parties again in the street, almost like it's a recovering forest ecology after a forest fire or something. But these kids have all learned that we're in the Roman colonial grid, so they all want to take a whack at this pinata here. The adults are like, don't hit it so hard, leave it for the other kids too. Go, hey mom, whack, whack. Okay, so these kids, this is what they call the birthday cake of world peace. It's actually a replica of their intersection that they themselves have helped to design and implement, so it exists. I just think it makes children crazy to have a birthday cake mock-up of the place that they create. Look at these future leaders. You cannot stop them. Look at all the people you have so many friends now that you can't even call them back. Like, oh, so irritating how many friends I have. Oh. But I know this place very well, and I could tell you stories looking up and down the streets of all the things they're doing. Like the painting of the street, it isn't even the point. All these people are getting married in the street. You see this chicken and this egg sitting within 2 interlocking wedding rings because of all the weddings that have been happening out here. It's the love, it's the connection, it's the fact that people are taking care of each other's children. The children then are taking down fences and putting in pathways or digging tunnels to connect them to their friends on the interiors of the blocks. New gardens are going in and people are actually picking up the sustainability benchmarks of the city in order to accomplish them at a local scale, like this. This is looking at the 4-block area around the first intersection. And here they're just reinventing their porches with totemic columns or simply some curtains or a wind-deflecting shield made out of reclaimed glass, just to make more convivial spaces, and then marking their pathways of connection. We're charting all kinds of things here, including rain gardens, food forests, perennial landscapes, activated porches, home businesses, and here we see agricultural landscapes being developed all around the node, places to play, places to gather, and really fantastic constructions that are about as ecological as you can possibly imagine. In this case, retrofitting a house and turning it into our Urban Permaculture Institute using straw clay insulation, and then obviously sculptural earth and plaster here. And then this is a community sanctuary in the center of the block. This is a kids' play area. So the city council was amazed by the survey findings and was asking us, where do you think this all will go? And we had no answer. We just put stickers We grabbed this old map, we ran to a meeting with the mayor, we just put a sticker on every one of the 95 neighborhoods. We said we have no idea where this needs to go, and we really don't know what all will happen, just that everywhere is missing this. And it needs to happen in a way that reflects the living culture and serves its highest vision and its sense of potential. We didn't show them this, though, which is the sacred napkin of world peace. This comes from, those times when you're sitting around with your friends thinking about what you can do to save the world. I hope you do this every now and then. It took us about a half an hour early in the process to just realize, if we transform Portland and then tell stories where people realize, oh my gosh, I can act locally and change the world. Then everyone can just affect systemic change by doing what they can where they are. So that's kind of our strategy that we've been playing out for the last 22 years, knowing that it's everyone's essential strategy anyway. So then we decided to take this all over the city when we invented a form of what we call carchitecture. We actually got an AIA merit award for this. And some of the architects in Portland were like, you can't do that, it's on wheels. Where's the foundation? But frankly, nomadic architecture is as valid, ephemeral architecture is as valid as stuff which is more permanent and settled. So we took a junky old Toyota truck, we took bamboo and greenhouse fabric, old rugs and pillows, and sent this thing out into the city as a placemaking. We called it the peace machine. And of course, we're just being silly, but we were saying this thing's more powerful than any war machine in the world because it can create and bring people together. So it went out into the landscape, wherever people would call for it, in parking lots and block parties, in parks like this. It would go and unfurl in about 15 minutes. It would be set up, and then people would sit there making music and sharing desserts and drinks into the night, and finally getting to meet the people in their own neighborhood because they had no public square. So we did this strategically. We went around the city, 27 events in a huge circle, and then we linked all of those locations together with people holding hands around the inner city in order to make a gigantic placemaking statement. 3 times we did this, actually, in order to say, this is our city, this is our place. And then it started to replicate all over the city. In the Sunnyside neighborhood, of course, their logo is the sunflower, so they reclaimed 33rd and Yamhill here to make it into their first piazza. And at that point, the Department of Transportation said, we have never seen anything build community like this. Duh. It's a restoration of a thing that always should have been there from the start. Here's a congressional delegation from Washington, D.C. coming to Portland to learn about what's been going on as they then redirect funding to use this as a youth gang violence prevention strategy around the country. In honor of Buckminster Fuller here, we're known as the City of Roses. There's a lot of roses you'll see in street intersections. This is celebrating the major flora and fauna of the Northwest region. Here's at the center of this one. I guarantee, if you do this, you will not see it vandalized, because the idea, of course, is you get the little vandals involved at the very beginning. And of course they're going to come up with something like this. Like in the case of this potluck where the neighbors were trying to figure out what to do, the kids had run out to play, but secretly they were deciding what they were going to tell the adults was going to happen. So they come in and they say, we've got it figured out. Of course, dinosaurs would be mad if they realized cars are burning fossil fuels, because that's the body of dinosaurs. So wouldn't a Tyrannosaurus Rex come out of a manhole cover and start to eat cars? And wouldn't Superman want to help and say things like, let's get rid of this damn thing? Get it into his mouth. Of course. Where is the humor in public space anyway? I think a more Gillenick or maybe partnership-oriented, certainly feminist-oriented public space would look like nothing we've ever seen before. A broader spectrum of emotional expression, certainly more artistry and courage than we've ever seen, especially in ancient places, all over the freaking town. Everyone who does this is living right here, and then this brings them together with the people where they are. And what we're cultivating is positivity and a sense of possibility, a courage to do the next thing and the next thing. And if this is how I understand the story of Portland. Long ago, we got off the couch and we went to the horizon we could see, and then that enabled us to see the next horizon. So now we're all about the next one and the next one, like we're running to the next horizon. And if a city and a town hasn't gotten to the horizon that it can see, of course you're going to have people telling you things are not possible. It's kind of their job. Oh, that's not possible. Everything we've ever done as a culture was possible in someone's mind, whether it's windshields or cheese. Like somebody's got an idea and then somebody's like, you can't do that to milk. That's not even moral. But somebody has a breakthrough and makes a cheese sandwich. I'm serious. Everything about our reality was opposed by someone along the way, and yet we persevered and moved ahead. Like this, we have become a culture of freaking yes in this city, where little girls can suggest street bioswale infrastructure that then is replicated across the country. An old lady can say, hey, can we grow food? We've got this insecure situation. What if we run out of oil? We'll be able to have food. So the city council says, yes, let's tweak the street ordinance so that you can grow food and raise planters for 6,000 miles of residential right-of-way. Okay. And then other activists suggest finally being able to grow fruit and nut trees in the streets. And then the city council says, all of this is going so well, from now on, you just do this. Don't ask us for permits anymore. You are automatically permitted and insured by doing it. Take over public space. Every single block face has to have at least one of these. Just go. Building street planters with kids to create pollinator habitat. Believe it or not, creating pollinator habitat in the streets is an objective of our DOT. Street trellises that span from yards over sidewalks to the grass strip. All sorts of different amenities and furniture in the street. Covered bike parking, solar-powered cob kiosks, all kinds of benches. And believe it or not, it is now legal to do community composting facilities for thousands of miles of street right-of-way, anywhere you freaking want. Amazing. But the hard part was only the beginning. The beginning was what basically subverted the bureaucracy and the political leadership into realizing that they could have way more fun with their jobs. And in fact, they asked us, like, why should we work with you? You defied us. And we said, because you'll have way more fun in your job. You'll have a more fulfilling experience and be able to use your discretion. They're like, okay, that's good. Now you're seeing them permit freaking kaleidoscopic hearts in the street. Where will it end? Food forests, 84 varieties of edibles and medicinals growing in very limited public space, very limited sort of tracts of land. This isn't even requiring a permit. People are just doing this to make the urban environment less subject to the heat island effect, more conducive to species and grow food at the same time. This is the second largest food forest in the United States. Here's Mr. NIMBY again, all stressed out, like, no, cherries, ah! Okay, so here we are putting in all of these different edible varieties. It takes you like at least a year to talk about it, unfortunately, and then about 4 hours to put it in, which is something to talk about. How long are we going to sit here and talk? How long is it going to take before we actually do something? I wouldn't do this again. You know what this project has led to? It's led to guerrilla planting at night wherever we freaking want. Group. Okay. Homeless people are building villages, and they are sanctioned, and they're actually being funded now by cities in the Northwest region. This is the first one in the country, Dignity Village. They said at the beginning, if you let us stabilize, we will not be a problem anymore. We won't live in doorways and under bridges. We will actually create a win-win scenario where we won't even be problems for police if we can just stabilize here. And for one thing, the women in the community are used to being sexually assaulted at least one time a night. They will be safe here. And we won't cost any money. So for $3 a night per person, compared to more than $100 a night in a government shelter, these adults are being housed here. And as they promised, they have the lowest ecological footprint of all communities in the city and the highest rate of political participation of all communities in the city. And believe it or not, homeless people, this group, has the lowest crime rate in all the city. So what I'm saying to you is that what we know for sure is that people are awesome when they are given half a chance to have place-based community where they have mutual co-responsibility with each other. They can be leaders and workers and live and work in the same place, totally car-free. And then replicates again. And there's a lot more to say about this one. This is where homeless people take care of other homeless people. It's like 12 Gandhis showed up in one place and they're like, oh, I can't even get a job. There's so many people who need help. So they're like homeless people taking care of homeless people. It's like saints, bodhisattvas, if you will. I'm not exaggerating. This is called R2D2, which means the right to dream too. So everyone here can come in for 12 hours and have a place to sleep. Working with PSU Center for Public Interest Design, we've developed an entirely breakthrough community village by and for homeless women only from a particular neighborhood. This thing is traveling like crazy across the country because basically the Kent neighborhood is able to say, what are you doing, neighborhood by neighborhood, what are you doing for your most vulnerable women, domestic violence survivors, homeless women in the streets? So this is a bit of design process working here, but this is the actual installation. 14 architecture firms designed the pods. Some of the most spectacular firms in the world, based in the Northwest, designed, and then their interns built all of these. The news media ate it up. We got calls from everywhere to house this village, and it ended up in the Kenton Village. But design and beauty came into the conversation of homelessness. It got tuned to be serving localized women, and now it's replicating like mad. But this is what's happened to the whole city. Our first public square was installed in the mid-'80s, and it was like touching the body of the region as if you were a giant acupuncturist or something, like trying to heal the body of the whole region, because suddenly everything began to change. We finally had a place where everyone could go and they knew that they would belong there. And it started off with an insurrection. We came out and we painted the rooftop of this 2-story parking garage. The mayor showed up in his Mustang, he's yelling at everyone saying, "You can't do this. You create this gathering place, you'll gather." Meanwhile, we painted his car while he wasn't looking. And we carried the day, and it became one of the greatest public spaces in all the world. So somehow they say it's the 7th. I don't know how they worked that out. The most bike commuters and the most bike lane miles by far of all cities. The most green buildings, the most natural buildings, the most permaculture installations, more than 50 farmers markets every week. This is the first major bridge in the USA that accommodates all forms of human transportation except for cars. The Tillicum Crossing. If you needed a reason to come to Portland, here it is. The biggest mural in the United States. The food culture, the artistic culture, and the music culture are absolutely through the roof and maybe exceeding what we've ever seen before. So what we're seeing here is stuff that isn't even organized as a form of activism, is flourishing in a community that feels that it owns its own place. Most trees per capita. I'm not trying to brag about Portland. I'm trying to say you can start with a little free library and just don't stop. Your career will flower. The friendship network will expand. People will fall in love and make children, and you won't even know what all is coming from all the connection that you engender with. I can tell you for sure, at some point, people will want to get naked. And they will ride through the streets by the thousands. Just look at them. Here's City Repair right here. We do have the largest naked bike ride in all the world, and it happens every year, usually in mid-June. It's definitely a thing to come see. Now, Minneapolis keeps saying, we're going to beat your record, and then it gets cold. I could go on and on about this, but I'll just end here. Like, you just don't know what you'll set into motion by the things that you'll do. If you're building community as the main goal, the thing you're doing is a means to build community, then more stuff will happen than you can ever anticipate, and we will change the world. Thanks.